Welcome to the Dr. Francavilla Show. I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Francavilla, board-certified family physician and diplomate with the American Board of Obesity Medicine. I've been helping patients lose weight to treat and prevent medical problems for the last 10 years, and I'm taking what I've learned from them to you. In this podcast, you will learn the science behind why you struggle with your weight and what to do about it, tips for common challenges, work to fight bias about what a healthy weight really is, and improve your relationship with food and your body. Please remember that while I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. This podcast is meant to be informational in nature only, not medical advice. Please seek out care from your physician for your specific needs. Okay, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dr. Francavilla Show. Today, we have a guest. We have Jeff Young. Jeff is a medical fitness expert. You don't hear that term a whole ton. He has 30 years of experience working in several world-class medical facilities. He is the president-elect of the American College of Sports Medicine's Greater New York Regional Chapter and chairs the National Strength and Conditioning Association for Special Populations Interest Groups. So he wears many hats. They are all related to educating clinicians, students, fitness professionals, and everyone on safe exercise programming for those with medical conditions and joint pain. So I am so glad to have you on this episode today, Jeff. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm excited and honored to be a guest, and I'm ready to get into it and start our discussion.
Awesome. So tell us how you got involved in medical fitness and maybe what that even means, medical fitness, because I don't think we hear that term a whole time.
Yeah, it's actually probably a good start point. There really is no consensus definition on what medical fitness is. I've been involved in this field for so long. My definition is that it is the proper assessment, prescription, and progression for people. There's two categories for people with chronic disease and or musculoskeletal conditions, joint pain, knee pain, low back, shoulder, whatever the case may be. So that's how I would define it, the two categories. And then how I got involved is probably a 3-hour story that I'll shorten to a couple minutes. But we were talking for a little bit prior to signing on here. And I mentioned that I've been in a bunch of right place, right time situations. And this was definitely one of them. My first job out of college, I graduated in 96 from Penn State with a degree in kinesiology. And my first job out of college was at Duke University Medical Center's Diet and Fitness Center, which was a medical weight loss facility. So that was like my introduction to medical fitness, but the term wasn't coined back then. And I was there for about a year. So it really wasn't until 2006, flash forward to them, again, right place, right time. I was just in a conversation with a physiatrist. For your listeners who don't know what physiatry is, they're like an orthopedist, except they don't perform surgery. And their expertise tends to be with the nervous system, musculoskeletal system. But in any case, I was in a conversation, and the medical director of this facility, which was called Mount Sinai Center for Health and Healing here in New York City, where I live, basically said, hey, we have a facility that's under construction on another floor. And I was originally just going to have it for physical therapy, but how would you like to come on and create and then manage the fitness component? And so that's really how it all started. And we had 33 healthcare providers. We had family medicine and internal medicine and cardiology and all kinds of other practitioners, which just gave me this amazing opportunity to be in a situation where I was able to either design the programs for or oversee the design of programs for people across the whole spectrum of medical conditions, musculoskeletal conditions. And that was a 10-year experience. It was a 10-year of just being able to pick the brains of these amazing and smart people. And that's really how I got involved in medical fitness. And it's just expanded and blown up from there.
Okay, this was not a question I told you I was going to ask, but I think you can handle it. How do you define fitness?
Yeah, that's a really broad term. That would really, I don't know.
All right, I'll share. Can I share the CrossFit definition with you? I don't know if you've heard it. You're talking about I'm a CrossFit coach. So CrossFit's definition is your work capacity across broad time and modal domains. So abstract there, but your work capacity across broad time and modal domains, like your just ability to do things in different settings.
Right. And I love the word capacity. So as a matter of fact, for this NSCA group that I chair, I'm the founding chair. So we launched it actually exactly 2 years ago. And when we were When I say we, myself and our executive council, I have an executive council of 6 members. And when we were going through our discussions and the application process to get this launched, the word capacity was something that we talked about a lot, and the importance of finding the person's initial capacity, their comfort zone, their start point, and determining what that is through knowing your exercise science and all that stuff. And then increasing that capacity, whether it's aerobic or strength or whatever the case may be. So yes, I couldn't agree more
Yeah.
with that
And
definition.
capacity
Love
just being fancy for what can you do, right? What are you able to do?
it.
Can you walk for 30 seconds? Can you walk for 10 hours? How much weight can you lift? What is your ability, your capacity to do something? So, more broadly speaking, I sometimes I find it hard to pinpoint all the benefits for exercise. But when you talk about exercise or you talk about fitness, why do you explain that it is important to health? What health benefits are we getting from exercise?
Yeah, that's an easy one for me. I'm prepared for this one because I just presented last year at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's annual conference in Orlando, and I had a bunch of slides on this. That's actually how we started the presentation. And we hear the phrase exercise is medicine, but it can be very ambiguous. What does this actually mean? Here's what it means. Exercise, and really any type of exercise, but strength training more specifically, but I'll get into that in a second. Exercise has a positive effect on every single system in the body. So to give that a little bit more clarity, the muscular system, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, skeletal system, your bone health, digestive system, your gut health, the hormonal system, reproductive, and also so your physical health, but also your mental health. So you name the system in the body and you name the organ, and exercise has a positive effect on it. Now, strength training, which I am biased towards, but I want to make
You don't
sure
look
that the
like it at
listeners
all. You don't look
understand.
like you've ever lifted a weight.
I want to make it clear though that I am not like this meathead. Everyone's got to be a power lifter type of thing. Absolutely, I'm a huge fan of aerobic exercise, and it needs to be part, and even just moving more. So it's moving more and exercise. But I am biased towards strength training, and it's very underappreciated and underutilized just in general in medicine, rehab, just in general. But strength training has a more positive effect on your muscles or your muscular system, your skeletal system, and your nervous system than any other form of exercise. I have it's not really a colleague, but someone I know through Facebook. His name is Dr. Stephen DeVore, PhD in exercise physiology. Taught at Ohio State for more than 20 years. He's a leader in the industry, and how he refers to strength training is that is a virtual panacea, or in other words, a solution or a remedy for nearly all difficulties or disease. And it really is. So I'm biased towards that. But to finish answering your question, the main reason why exercise is so important to health is because as soon as we initiate exercise, as soon as we start it, our organs and our systems literally start talking to each other. They start communicating. If anyone wants to Google it, there's actually a term called exerkines, and it's something that a field that's being studied more and more. And it's basically just referring to the fact that through the release of proteins and hormones and other things, our organs and our systems start talking to each other as soon as we start exercising, because our body's balance or baseline is rest, or at or near rest. And so as soon as we start exercising, the body's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? We aren't resting anymore. And it's a stress to the body. It's a good stress, but it's a stress to the body. And so the body's like, what are we doing? And basically the organs start talking and communicating with each other, start stepping up their game.
Okay, well, that
And
is
all
new
of
to
the
me. I may need to find a guest where we can talk about that because that sounds really like interesting. But that kind of fits with some of what we know about how beneficial exercise is, right? Our bodies are meant to move. And I think 90 something percent of the time when we do some sort of movement or exercise, we feel better afterwards, right? You mentioned the mental health benefits, but almost always, sometimes you push it too hard or you weren't feeling good to begin with, but almost always you feel better after you've done that movement, right? And so if you have not
right.
exercised in a while, you're going to have to trust us on this, but you feel better. And for those of you who exercise sometimes or exercise consistently, I often remind people of that, right? That you feel better almost always, at least a little bit, but sometimes tremendously better from that movement. And so even though sometimes you don't want to start, it's hard to motivate yourself, hard to stick to your your schedule, like you're going to have that benefit. And then it sounds like you've got some like really cool science that explains why that happens.
Can I tell you, my wife and I, fortunately, I have a wife who loves to exercise, and we honestly work on autopilot on the weekends. We just have a ritual where we get up at a certain time and we eat pretty much nearly the same breakfast, and we get to the gym at the same time. And I honestly use this stuff as motivation. I'm weeks away from turning 58, so my goals for myself are different than when I was in my 20s and 30s. Now it is about longevity and well-being and just overall health and feeling good. And I'm very fortunate that this is what I do for a living, and I know exercise science, but I absolutely use this stuff to motivate me and my wife. You're gonna get ready to hear her story here in a second, but we see through the doors, and we remind ourselves that even on a day when we're feeling tired or we aren't really feeling into it or whatever the case may be, we know from experience that just get that warm up in and then just go from there. If you still aren't really feeling into it, then we adjust our sessions, and then that day we might go a little lighter. And if we are feeling more into it, maybe we might go a little more heavier. But then when we're walking out of the doors, sure enough, we always talk about how we're so glad that we did it.
Yeah.
You feel like it's an accomplishment. Your body tells you that it feels good, so that we just constantly remind ourselves of that.
I love it. And I think sometimes it's just making it the routine, making it non-negotiable, right? Where you're like, and if you really are not feeling well, you have an injury or you're sick or but then you can always stop, but start warm up a little bit, stretch, start walking, see how you feel. And probably once you get started, you'll feel good and want to keep moving at least for a little while. And then some of what you mentioned about sticking to that routine with food and sticking to a routine with exercise, we know that those are habits for success. I talk often about the National Weight Control Registry, which is a population of people who've kept weight off for more than 30 pounds for more than a year. So they've kept off more than 30 pounds for a year. And one of the things is those consistent patterns with nutrition, right? Like most of the time they just eat the same things. And then on average, I share this fact all the time, they're exercising an hour a day. So if you want to maintain weight, that consistency with exercise becomes really important. Okay, I think we could talk all day, but I want to hear the story about your wife that you were teasing us with there. What's your wife's story?
Yeah, so we met back in 1997, right after I moved to New York City from Duke Medical Center, and we got married in 1999. So we've been together for 26 plus years. In 2004, was feeling bad, real bad for several days, and was actually in the hospital for 5 days. And during that time, they diagnosed her with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis.
Oh, wow.
And it turned our worlds upside down. This was 2004. I didn't start in this Mount Sinai facility until 2006. And we really didn't know much about multiple sclerosis. All we knew was like wheelchairs and like bad things. And her health was spiraling downhill for the first 5.5 years. It was really bad. It was daily flare ups. And I'm not going to get into a long story, but it was daily flare ups, and it was horrible, obviously, for her to experience, and it was horrible for me to see and feel helpless. 2 years into it, I'm now starting at Mount Sinai, so now I have access to clinicians to be able to pick their brains and stuff like that. But to be honest with you, it probably took another 2 to 3 years before I felt confident enough to really put her on a structured program. And again, in the meantime, it's really bad, and so bad that one of the many symptoms she was having was restless leg syndrome, which was keeping her up at night for hours, and it led to accumulating fatigue, which caused her to be late for work all the time, and she ended up being fired from a job because she was late to work all the time. But that ended up being a blessing in disguise, because the next job she got, there was someone there that had MS, and she finally had someone to talk to. And so the first thing that she did was start to clean up her diet. She had too much sugar in her diet, too much junk food and processed food and stuff like that. Lo and behold, she starts feeling better. In the meantime, I'm picking the brains of the clinicians I'm working with, and I'm feeling comfortable enough to put her on a progressive strength training program. We started in the higher repetition ranges with lighter weights. And it took years. It's a long story, but it took years. But I slowly started to work her down into some moderate weights, and then slowly some heavier weights. Not that it was all the time, but I started including that in the program. You flash forward to today, and since you're a CrossFitter, you're going to appreciate this. She's 47. She's 5'4" and weighs 130 pounds. She can deadlift 80 for repetitions. So that's twice her
Okay,
body
yeah,
weight plus
that's more
20.
than I can deadlift for sure.
You can squat over like 205 pounds for 3 or 4 repetitions, which is 1.5 times her body weight plus 10 pounds. Dumbbell press in 50s and 55s. But more importantly, her condition has been re-diagnosed as inactive and benign. So she has completely reversed the course of a disease that for most people is progressive and degenerative, and obviously the associated symptoms. And she's healthier than most people who don't have a disease, and she's stronger actually than most guys of just about any age. So it has been an amazing story and an evolution to watch her transition from a really sick person to adopting lifestyle medicine, right? The healthy eating and the exercise and supplements, and how that then led to like better sleep. So then restorative sleep and all the other things with it. And now she has kicked MS's butt.
That's
And so
amazing. Wow. I mean, that is like the definition of exercise is medicine right there.
right. It's a huge reason why I have my passion. I could tell story because I spent so many years at in Center for Health and Healing. I could tell story after story of success. But since it's my wife and it's very near and dear to
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
heart
You up close and
personally,
personal. Yeah.
absolutely.
So we've talked a little bit about strength training so far, but sometimes I find that is a little bit of an overwhelming term. People do picture deadlifting and power cleans and these crazy Olympic lifts and things. When we talk about strength training, what does that really mean? And what can someone who maybe has really not done strength training in a long time or maybe ever expect to start off with for strength training?
Absolutely. And yeah, I just actually presented for the National Strength and Conditioning Association's Personal Trainers National Conference, which is a virtual conference. It's going to be launched in October. And my presentation, a 90-minute presentation, revolved around the answer to this question. So I actually like to use the phrase resistance training just
Yeah.
because strength training can scare people. And so I like to use resistance training. And then we could broaden that to say the resistance is, as long as it's enough to challenge you and lead to some sort of adaptation. And it's not like a warm-up intensity. It can be machines, it can be bands, it can be body weight. I don't CrossFit, but I'm not against CrossFit. And one of the things I love about CrossFit is it's reintroduced barbell exercises and like the standard squats and cleans and stuff like that, which I'm a huge fan of. But in any case, that aside, you don't have to do those things. And basically what I presented on was the step one is to educate yourself, right? You have to move from theory to application. Everyone wants the application part, whether you're a student in school or whatever the case may be. But I'm a big believer in application first. And then really the start point that I preach is a physical therapy type start point. So
Mm.
for the listeners who have had physical therapy before, I don't think that's the only start point, but I think it's a logical start point in the sense that it's low volume. They tend to do 2 or 3 sets of 10 of whatever exercises they're working on with that particular person. So I just think that 2 or 3 sets of 10 with a warm up intensity is just a nice, comfortable start point. And where you're using that time, it might be like a 3 week phase or 4 week phase or something like that. It's called a familiarization phase, but you're using that time to determine what exercises are appropriate for that person based on, is it home, is it gym, is it a combination, what your pain free range of motion, top perform, things like that, and use that as a strategic entry into a more
So are you
structured
saying
strength.
people like starting with a physical therapist is a good place to start? Or if someone's just listening and they're like, I keep hearing about strength activity and I
Yeah,
keep hearing about resistance and how it's important for longevity, it's important for maintaining weight, it's important for health. Like, where would they start?
it depends. A physician like yourself, you would determine if that's the appropriate start point. And sometimes it is appropriate because either maybe the joint pain they have or conditions they have, or the fact that insurance is going to cover it, so it's going to be less expensive, and it's going to be in a clinical safe setting. There's a list of reasons why it can many times be an appropriate start point, but it doesn't have to be the start point. As long as the fitness professional or the information, if the source of the information that the person is getting, the information from, whether it's a qualified fitness professional or something on not social media, but on the internet that is reputable, then it doesn't have to be physical therapy. As long as it's a, is it, as it's a way that,
A progression. Like, If you haven't
exactly. And
done strength training or resistance in a while, you might start
yes,
with just more repetitions, maybe no weight or low
yes.
weight, and then you're building.
It's a meet you at your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to do. We want, and that's where that word capacity comes in, right? We want to determine that person's capacity and to help us determine their comfortable and safe start point. And I like to stay there. I like to stay there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like sometimes I'll get referrals and they'll say, I'm paying this New York City, so I'm paying you $1 million. Let's get going. And I'll actually play doctor in the sense that I'll say, no, you put yourself in my position. I see this as a new body is being placed in front of me, and I need at least a little
Yeah.
time to get to know it. So that's comfortable start point, and then the tortoise wins the race, and we're gonna progress in small, tolerable
I
increments.
love it. And I think like being humble, if you're restarting or starting for
Yeah.
the first time, like you want to get the movement patterns down so that you're
Yes.
engaging the right muscles and that you're using proper forms so you don't injure yourself later. And
Yeah.
so if you can invest a few weeks in, even though it may not be quite as exciting to do more reps and lower weights for some people, like it's worth the investment, right? You don't want to jump to the heavier weights or the things that you maybe could do in the past and then you hurt yourself or feel terrible and now you're in this vicious cycle where you stop and start. So I think that's a great point to invest in doing it the right way, and that may involve someone from the outside, right? That may involve a physical therapist, that may involve a trainer. And then you mentioned maybe like a reputable thing online. Are there any that you happen to like love or that you guide people towards?
I'm gonna be biased with my answer to this one. I have a couple clinician colleagues, one's a physician assistant and the other one is a physical therapist, and we have actually started launched a website called the MRF Institute, so the Medicine to Rehab to Fitness Institute, where I'm very passionate about this pathway from medicine through rehab, if necessary, into the fitness and wellness domain, and they're very passionate too, and so we've actually launched a website. It's a new launch, so I'll be honest with you, it's, dump the content on the website right now. We are, fully aware that it needs to be more user-friendly, but
It's
I've
there. Okay. So
videos.
maybe something to keep an eye on. But, and then again, I often tell people with exercise has to be something that is comfortable to you, right? So I personally do not like dance based exercise, right? That's like a no for me. I'm not good at it. But if you love something that's like dance based, great, you do that. That's a good fit for you, right? So sometimes it is, I'm all about just helping people find their path. Try out the workout that you find on TikTok or YouTube or whatever. And if you like it and it feels good and you enjoy the instructor, follow that progression. If it's not a fit, it's not a fit. There's so many things nowadays. And so I also have a really hard time like recommending just one thing because we all have our different preferences of how we like to
Right,
work out, what sort of trainers we like. Some people like the person
yes.
who's yelling at them. Some people like the gentle person. And yeah, there's so much. And that's an amazing thing about 2023 is you can find so many things that are free or really affordable to get started on fitness online. And awesome to hear that you have a resource that sounds like is going to be a little bit more focused on the medical side for people as well. All right, let's see what else. One of the things we haven't touched on a whole time that sounds like is an area of expertise is injuries. And when you described medical fitness earlier on, I was laughing to myself. I'm like, seems like everyone had at a certain age, we all have something, right? We all have some nagging knee or back or neck injury, right? When we're in our teens and 20s, most of us have less barriers. So for someone who maybe does have a pretty significant physical barrier, maybe they have some knee arthritis, hip arthritis, a back injury. What is your approach or guidance for those people from that medical fitness perspective?
Yeah, and I love answering this question, but I'll only be able to give you that a 30,000-foot bird's eye
Of
view.
course, yeah.
I actually teach a, sports medicine and rehabilitation course for an exercise science program here in New York City as an adjunct professor, and, so the answer to your question is actually I've partially answered the question in the sense that start with that safe start point. So
Yeah.
important. Start with the lighter weights, learn proper form, and then progress from there. So that's part of the answer to your question. But I would add to that, and again, referring back to physical therapy. And since I've worked alongside physical therapists for the past 20 years, as I've really gotten used to that language, I like to call them joint friendly exercises, knee friendly, low back friendly, shoulder friendly, neck friendly exercises. And the person would have to learn and become familiar with them. But to give some example, if someone has a knee issue, it almost doesn't matter what it is, whether it's arthritis or patellofemoral syndrome or whatever the case. If you go to physical therapy, chances are really high that they're going to start you with bridges, uh, a short arc knee extension where you aren't, bending your knee a whole lot, exercises to strengthen your hips, like sideline clams and stand sidestepping and things like that. But the point is that if you name the joint in the body, there are exercises that take stress off that just by the nature of the exercise with the spine, the low back. What I like to do is I categorize 4 training exercises and therefore, exercises that hit the spine into 2 categories, stabilizers and movers. So your stabilizers are gotta be like your plank variations, or for those who've had Pilates, like Pilates mat exercises, and your movers are gonna be like your crunches or your rotations or your side bending
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. I like to start people off if they refer to me with herniated disc or degeneration or one of the spondies or something like that. I take movement out of the equation. Even if it's only for a week or 2, you're gonna really lower the risk for a spine injury if you aren't moving it. So, it's modified planks or it's a Pilates mat progression or something like that. And then with the shoulder, there's something known as the safe zone, and all it really means is that the risk for injury is significantly reduced if you don't do things overhead at first or upright rows, and you just stick with reverse flies, lateral raises, things like that don't cause your upper arm to go above parallel to the ground. But the point is that there are joint friendly exercises. And when you throw them into the program along with safe start points, slow progression, proper form, things like that, you've just now created a nice, safe
Yes, I
structure.
love it. Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is that there are experts who can help you along with this. And so if one of the things that's been keeping you from moving is an injury or something that's bothering you, either taking yourself to a physical therapist or having your physician refer you to a physical therapist may really help you get some of those movement patterns back and do them in a safe way. And then also may even help you rehab that injury if at all possible, too, right? But if nothing else, it's going to teach you how to safely move with that injury, because I do think a lot of times that happens is people, maybe they loved running at one point or they loved weightlifting at one point and they have this injury and now they're just not sure what to do with themselves, and that's okay. We have experts who can help guide you. I think that that's a great way to think about it, and that's medical fitness, right? There's just fitness, you just go do your thing, but if you don't know how to do that, find those experts who can help you do that.
Let me just quickly add and say that people are justifiably apprehensive to get back to either start a resistance training program or get back into it if they've been injured. As a matter of fact, I worked with a physiatrist who was at the national level in Olympic lifting for more than a decade. And he's an MD, he's a physiatrist. He works at Mount Sinai Spine Institute.
Ooh,
And so and I was a primary referral source for him for many, right up from like 2014 up until the pandemic. And so I'm very familiar with being scared of loads and scared of weights. And it's justifiable. But education is so important. And it's important for people to understand that it's also puts you at high risk of injury if you remain weak. We need that
yes. Oh
tissue to
gosh. Yes. Yes.
we need it to get stronger. That's again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but start with that safe start point, progress like a tortoise, but we need to increase strength to increase tissue resilience and ability to handle those stresses and forces.
Yes. You know what I tell my patients a lot of times who are, they're just struggling to get into or back to exercise is like, you have to move it or lose it, right? It is going to be really
Right.
hard if at 65 you retire and you suddenly decide, I think I'm going to try to start moving, right? Not saying you can't, but it's going to be a lot harder to build that capacity. And I always think of the people I see who age really well, the people who seem healthy as a horse and mobile as a horse at 90, right? And they're like, that's what I would like to look like. And in my experience as a doctor and just a family member, those are the people who move pretty much every day. They've always done something, right? And I think that's a key thing to think about is yes, you may have this injury or this discomfort that's making it hard for you to move now, but likely you're going to have more and more of those if we don't get that capacity with your body, right? If we don't improve your fitness, you're going to likely have more and more injuries and discomfort as you age.
My wife and I at the gym that we typically go to, there's one of our best friends there. Her name is Sam, and she just turned 96.
Oh my goodness.
And exactly what you just described. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be interviewing her soon because her story is so amazing. But you're exactly right. She grew up with some older brothers and felt like she needed to keep up, and they picked on her and all that whole kind of stereotypical story. But the point is that she's been a lifelong exerciser, and it's amazing to watch her move like she's 36 or 46 and not 96. So it's really cool. Absolute motivation for us.
Yeah, I love it. That seems like a fantastic place to end. I'm going to leave with that as the final thought. Move it or lose it, right? Anything is better than nothing. Strength training or resistance training, we really can't emphasize enough how important that is for aging, for continuing muscle mass, and for maintaining body weight long term. You want that lean muscle mass. We had a podcast recently where we talked a little bit about that too. And thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today. Just like a wealth of information. And I'm going to follow up with you, make sure we get everything that we talked about in the show notes so people can find all of your resources. Because it sounds like you are just everywhere teaching everyone about all these things.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an awesome conversation. Just really appreciate it. And you can tell how passionate I am. So hopefully you really can tell how much I appreciate this.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure your stuff's in the show notes. And until next week, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Francavilla Show, where we learn about all things related to weight and health. If you love this podcast, make sure to leave those 5-star reviews and share this podcast with a friend or loved one. If you have a topic about weight and health you want me to tackle, head over to the website, thedrfrancavillashow.com to submit your question. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss next week's episode. Take care.